Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the second session of Ask the Expert ASCENT webinar series 3 on a very interesting topic and of much importance to entrepreneurs, that is risk evaluation and mitigation. That is, how do we as entrepreneurs identify potential risks to our businesses and ways to mitigate them? I am Rutvika Charegaonkar, Chief Financial Officer at Anchrom Enterprises India Private Limited, based in Mumbai, and I have been an ASCENT member of the Chanakya Trust Group since the last 2.5 years. I am very pleased to introduce the speaker for today, Rohit Mahajan, who is the President, Risk Advisory at Deloitte. I strongly feel the risk management should be embedded within the culture of the organization so that everyone is focused on managing and optimizing risk, and that it is the responsibility of everyone working in the organization. We would like to hear from Rohit on this topic, that it is of much importance to SMEs and MSMEs. Over to you, Rohit.
Thanks, Rutvika, and good evening, everyone. Thanks to the ASCENT team for inviting me to present today. Risk evaluation and mitigation, how to identify potential risks to the business and the ways to mitigate them. I think that's the topic which I've been given. And what I will do is I will try to share my experiences. I have a presentation which I will run you through. Will take 20 minutes doing that, and then I will open the floor for 40 minutes for you to ask any question which you would like to on today's discussion around risk. I think when I looked at the topic for today, risk evaluation and mitigation, and how to identify potential risks to the business and the ways to really mitigate them, I think it is actually, in fact, the more I think about it, is actually a very easy statement to read and understand, but challenging to implement, really considering the very dynamic and disruptive environment that we are living in. And today, let me throw some light on the basis of my experience in terms of how I see some of the emerging, fast emerging, forward-looking organizations or startups or entrepreneurs are really managing this entire risk agenda to really ensure that they look at risk more to power the performance rather than to slow them down. And this is something which I would like to reiterate all throughout my session today. And I would like to mention that managing risk is not about meeting an obligation, be it regulatory, financial, or social. It is important to manage risk to power business performance. I think once we are very clear on that aspect, then we will realize that risk as an element to an organization can actually be a significant booster to the performance of the organization. Now, today, when you look at large Indian organizations, the worth, or I would say the net worth of the organization, is not only being valued on the basis of whether it's the top line or the bottom line, basically with respect to the business performance, but significant value is also being attached to the way the organizations are managing risk, building a fundamentally strong and sustainable organization that is internally aligned, responsive, and need to have the flexibility to change to respond to any disruption. In fact, this has become a very, very critical aspect of fundamentally strong organizations. Do they have the need and the flexibility to change to the responding environment, or I would say changing environment? And in today's environment, we talk about disruption. I think that's the moot word which is being used very loosely. But how do you manage the risk of disruption is a question which is there and up in agenda of a lot of CEOs, boards, etc. But when you move to the first slide, Rutvika, if you can, if you can move to the first slide, the next one. Sorry, my apologies. Yeah. Now this slide is, it actually provides an analogy that can be easily referenced to today's business. We can grow fast, but we cannot take our eye off the risk of what can go wrong. I have seen large and forward-looking organizations struggle to survive as their focus was front end. And when I say front end, their aspiration was to grow and grow, and they ignored the back end, the entire operational aspect of running the business. And the challenge was, because they did not invest in the back end, down the line, they struggled even on the front end. And I'll give you a classic example, which is this organization does not exist today. It used to be a company called Network Typewriters, which is, I think it used to exist 20 years back, but it was a case study in itself. It was, they introduced electronic typewriters in India. They were the first company to introduce electronic typewriters in India. And the company grew very, very fast, very fast. Now, they had the aspiration of really ensuring that they grow fast, they get into diverse businesses and create a large organization. But the fundamental problem which they did not envisage was the front end grew so fast that the back end couldn't keep pace with the front end. There was a lot of investment which was happening on the front end, but the back end couldn't support the growth in the front end, and the company literally fell apart and shut down. In fact, there was a joke which was floating around 20 years back. I know that because I saw that company very closely, that they used to sell typewriters on every red light, right? But they had no record, who they have sold to, who they need to collect money from. They had huge debtors, which landed them in a situation where they literally had to shut down. So the company is non-existent. So when I say that we cannot take our eyes off, the risk of what can go wrong, especially in an environment where businesses are focusing significantly on growth, right? It is important that the front end grows along with the back end, and the back end keeps pace with the front end to ensure a very stable and fundamentally strong organization for the long term. So to be in control, one needs to know what can go wrong and how to mitigate the risk of what can go wrong. Now, today, a lot of entrepreneurs talk about knowing the unknown or wanting to know the unknown. But the challenge is that they plan for the future unknown using yesterday's logic. So if you see, more often than not, we actually go back into history to understand what were the issues for us to really plan for the future, which is the right way to do it. But more often than not, the logics which we refer to, which are historical, in today's environment are not keeping pace in terms of what you need to know or what is the unknown that you need to know. So the fundamental problem is that risk has always been unknown to us. One thing is to know what you need to know. It is another to know what you don't know. Now, to prepare for uncertainties, companies will have to work on risk profiles, something similar to what, let's say, airlines does, where every incident in the airline, whether it's big or small, is investigated. And the rationale is to understand what went wrong so that it does not happen again. And even if it does happen again, there are mitigating factors in place. So also today, organizations need to be forward-looking and make risk sensing part of their ongoing business decision-making process. I think it's a very fundamental, strong, and important statement which I'm making, where my suggestion to all the entrepreneurs, even organizations, is that we need to, on a continuous basis, keep sensing the risk, keep asking a question, what can go wrong in our business which could threaten the existence of the business? That should be part and parcel of every business decision-making process if we really need to mitigate the risks which we are exposed to in today's environment. If you go to the next slide, I know I've spent a lot of time in the slide, but this is a slide I really like, which is the previous one. I really like because it just sets the context of the fact that risk is actually an enabler for you to grow fast, right? It's an enabler to you to power your performance. So when you look at this slide, I think this is a very interesting slide. A couple of things I would like to highlight. Today's business environment, how you define it. It's fast, it's complex, it's disruptive, it's definitely uncertain. And we've learned it in the last 1.5, 2 years that environment is uncertain. So there is a significant expectation / demand for today's organizations, big or small. Now, what is happening is because of the complexity, because of the disruptive nature of the environment, right? There are newer business models which are coming up. And I'll give you a classic couple of examples. Look at organizations like Zerodha, Ola, Zomato, a Fresh Menu, Cars 24, Urban Company, Delivery. They have actually challenged the status quo. They have challenged old or traditional business models. And what is it that they have done? They have created a business, on the, on the foundation of technology, analytics, artificial intelligence. So they have leveraged emerging technologies and they have created newer business models. It is not that the risks, they are not exposed to risk. They're absolutely exposed to risk. Their nature of risks are very different from what possibly traditional businesses were exposed to. But having said that, today, these are large, successful companies which have grown fast, understood what can go wrong in leveraging, let's say, technology, artificial intelligence, cognitive, etc., and use them to their advantage to ensure that they are focused not only on the market and growth, but they are also focused to ensure that they're managing risk significantly effectively. We also need to look at the fact that it's not about just disruptive and uncertain environment. There are challenges even around the regulatory environment. Now, the challenge around regulatory environment is that the disruption and the change in the business is happening so fast that regulations are also trying to do a catch up. And that's where the confusion or the dilemma stands out. What is it that I need to comply with? Because we are already ahead of the race when it comes to leveraging technology, analytics, data, etc., while regulations are still catching up to put rules around how they need to be used in businesses. But having said that, it is important to ensure that we understand the regulations, even if they are not local regulations, but understand what is it that some of the large global economies have implemented, and see if we can actually use those when we are building our business models to ensure that we are compliant with regulations. And then, I won't spend time on the political and geopolitical environment. And, everyone knows about it, whether it's with respect to trade wars, which definitely has impact, plus also an advantage for a country like India, because, the entire Make in India becomes a big focus for a lot of organizations today, but it has its own challenges. And then there is fast changing customer preferences. The more information customers have access to, right, the more worldly aware they become, the bigger the risk of customer preferences changing as we go along. So how do businesses stay agile? How do businesses stay flexible to ensure that they can respond to the changing customer needs and preferences? I think it's a very fundamental point today in today's environment of so much of change, that businesses cannot ignore the fact that customer is the king. We need to service and respond to their needs and preferences. But if we don't do that, the existence becomes a bit challenging. I will talk about it in terms of in terms of the threats which today organizations are facing. Sorry, the slide won't be on, but I will talk about it in terms of what are the threats and challenges, some of the threats and challenges which organizations, emerging organizations are experiencing today. The focus being growth, profitability. There is competition. There are margin pricing pressures. There are changes to trade regulations which companies are exposed to. There are, the funding / cash flow challenges which companies are experiencing, both in today's environment as even earlier when you're growing your business from bottom up. Funding is always a big challenge which organizations which have transformational ideas go through. Then there is, the entire technology risk which organizations are experiencing more on the cyber, and cyber threat is becoming more and more real. It's actually become a boardroom agenda. And what is it that the organizations, or I would say the companies, are doing to manage these risks? I think they're looking at a couple of responsive, I would say responsive strategies to really manage these risks. And the responsive strategies is, you can define it under 5 areas, which is avoid, transfer, mitigate, accept, and exploit. When you look at avoiding, risk avoidance is actually an approach that really eliminates any exposure to risk that poses a potential loss. So avoidance leads to taking a very conservative approach for business, and I won't recommend it, right? Especially in today's environment, organizations need to take risk, but they need to take informed risk. They need to prepare for it, right? They need to have mitigating factors in terms of the fact that we know there could be a risk, but what is it that we have done with respect to our controls, processes, checks and balances to ensure we mitigate those risks? There are also instances where I've seen organizations have accepted the fact that there is going to be a risk in a specific exercise which we will do. But having said that, the risk, the cost of risk is lower than the benefit it has to the business, and businesses have gone ahead and really, taken that risk. And then there is exploiting. There is an element of uncertainty by making the opportunity absolutely happen. So where the risk, which is high, but you're also very confident that you will be able to pull off what you're trying to achieve, right? So it's a very, very, informed kind of a decision to go ahead. So the 5 strategies which I've talked about is avoiding, transferring, mitigating, accepting, and exploiting. And when I talked about transferring, it is more in terms of leveraging services like insurance, or putting clauses in a contract where the responsibility gets passed on to the service provider. So these are the things, or newer areas or newer risk strategies which organizations are following. So Rutvika, if you can go to the next slide. Now I think I'll get it back on track. The next slide, please, because I think I've covered in the interest of time. Yeah, if you look at this slide, I personally like this slide a lot. I think what it does is it really sets right in terms of what are the risks which are rewarded risks, which are the risks which are unrewarded, and which are the controllable risks. I think when you look at calculated risks, now these are the risks which result from organizational strategies and operational choices intended to generate value. Whether it's, when you take a decision on new markets, products, or adoption of any new technology, there you are, you are actually entering into a new market, launching a new product, or adopting a new technology with all the known facts of what can go wrong. Then there is an imposed risk, right? Risk, something which we are actually going through for the last 1.5 years, wherein it is unknown to us, right? Risks emanating from uncontrollable and unavoidable external factors. But the important part is we still need to have the mechanism, wherewithal, and agility to respond to these risks for the survival of the organization. And then there are these self-inflicted risks. I think these are possibly poorly run companies, because significant risk, whether it's from operations, certain decisions, behavioral, certain consequences within the organization itself, could be a poor judgment or gaps in compliances. These are risks which are unpardonable. They are self-inflicted. They are significantly unrewarding. They are controllable, but organizations ignore it. And when they ignore these kind of risks, I gave an example of network typewriters. This is exactly what happens. You put the entire existence of the organization to risk. So calculated, imposed, and self-inflicted. I think these are the 3 risks. And it's very important to make sure that we monitor our bets in terms of where is it that we would like to take risk, where is it that we would like to mitigate risk. I think that in itself is an important exercise which organizations need to do. If you move to the next slide. Okay, the next slide is, and it's an interesting slide before I quickly go to the case studies. It is a survey which was done by, or a study which was done by the Harvard Business Review. And it really talks about the fact that when you look at risk management, when you view it, the proportion of significant losses in market value caused by each type of risk. So strategic risk has led to almost 86% impact on market value in organizations. And it was a group of, I think, more than 2,500 organizations which they picked up for studying, and they realized because of failure to really invest and understand the strategic risk nature of the business, there was an impact on market value, and 86% of those instances were there. Compared to that, operational risks were just 9%, which led to impact on market value of the organization. While the way we look at risk and the way we try to manage risk, and nothing has changed. I still have a lot of companies which give a lot of focus, impetus on how can we manage operational risk. They don't worry about the strategic aspect of risk. They actually worry about the operational risk, which possibly the companies are exposed to, right? Or the financial reporting risk, right? So that's the dilemma or dichotomy or a disconnect between what we need to worry about, but what we actually worry about when we're really building a business. I think the starting point is to ensure that when you are building your strategy for your business, risk needs to be an element as part of that strategy. And every time you need to ask a question, if this is what we intend to do, what are the risks we could be exposed to, which we need to know and start thinking of managing upfront rather than reacting as we go along. So if you move to the next slide, please. I think you can move to the next slide. I've actually covered this. Yeah. Okay, so this was I've covered. So I'm sorry about this. I think this is an old deck. If you can move to the next slide. Now let's get into the case studies. So when you look at the case studies, this is a very interesting case study. In fact, I have two of them. I know I've busted 20 minutes, but I'll take maybe a couple of more minutes to do two case studies, which are very, very interesting. One is a budget footwear company, and the other one is a new company in the technology or consumer electronic space. So when we looked at and this is a company where we are closely associated with trying to help this company into transforming from where they are to where they aspire to be. They aspire to be or want to be a 2,500 crore company, multi-brand, etc. Right. Today, the company was actually incorporated in 1981 as a budget footwear manufacturer with two promoters. They have a very, very strong presence in the North market, and they actually moved from being a budget footwear company to getting into the entry-level premium footwear company. And today, when we look at this company in 2020, it is almost an 800 crore company. It has 15 manufacturing sites. It has 6,000 SKUs, and now it has 8 promoters because the family has grown over the years, right? The children have also joined the business. So it has 8 promoters in all and 2,500 employees. Now, what is the aspiration of the company? The aspiration of the company is they want to transition from being just a budget and an entry-level premium footwear company to really build a premium brand, right? And also shift from being a regional player to a national player. And they realize that 8 promoters running a company is suboptimal. They would like to make it more professionally run. And I think this is a very important point where the promoters have realized that, look, today there is only that much they can contribute to the company. The company has reached a scale beyond which the promoters themselves don't have the wherewithal to really take it to the next level. So they are realizing their shortcoming, and they would like to get a professional to come and run the company and deliver on the aspiration of making it a 2,500 crore company by 2025. So that's the aspiration which they're working on. Now, what is the challenge to this aspiration? Now, the big challenge to this aspiration is that there is definitely ambiguity. Ambiguity in terms of what role who plays. 8 promoters, 2,500 employees, significantly promoter-driven, promoter-focused. They're taking decisions, right? They have not percolated and defined roles and responsibilities across the 8 promoters itself. So there are overlaps there, right? They have not invested in brand building because they did not have the wherewithal, or I would say they don't have the understanding of how can an organization which is around 800 crores get scaled up to 2,500 crores. So brand building was a big issue. They were always dependent on the channel, where they try to monopolize the channel by giving them discounts and credit, and they did not have a very clear understanding of what is the customer preference at a national level, because they've always played at a regional level. There was always a gap between the demand and supply. They could not service the demand because of the silos in which all the departments were working, considering the fact there were 8 promoters. They had limited resources because their inventory management was really in a bad shape. They did not manage that well, and it really threatened and put them at risk because they could not supply for the demand which was there in the market, and competition was trying to eat into that space. So there was a big risk which they ran, and they just did not know how to manage that risk. And obviously, considering the fact that they are leveraging channels to promote their products, they did not have a clear view of customer expectations, right? So that also became a huge challenge. Now, how are they trying to manage challenge now is they're trying to align everyone to a common vision and a goal. What is it that you would aspire to achieve? They're making it clear who plays what roles and responsibilities. There is more accountability which is getting pushed down the levels to ensure that everyone plays their role, right? They are trying to rework their entire working capital, because inventory contributes a significant part of the working capital. That's another eye-opening which they have, that they need to manage their inventory well, especially in today's environment where people are working on time inventory. And then they are also trying to see if they want to be a national player, they need to start building a brand. They cannot not have a brand and become a national player. They are acquiring talent, which will help them achieve and grow the company and take it to the next level. So we're actually talking about growing the company almost 3.5 times. And they're also, very interestingly, very focused on leveraging technology to manage their processes, right? Manage the entire backend. So they are implementing ERP to ensure that the backend is managed well and can support the front end for them to deliver 2,500 crores. So I think if you see the learnings, right, they've done well for the ability or the capability they had, but moving to the next level of growth, they realized their shortcomings. That was a risk. They have brought in professionally managed professional managers to run the business. They are redefining rules and responsibilities. They are reworking their entire business model, especially with respect to capital and working capital management. They are focusing on building a brand, and they are really aligning all the processes, in the back end to ensure it supports the front end. So this is a company which is highly profitable but struggling to grow. So these are the changes and the challenges which they've gone through. If you go to the next slide. Now, the next slide is of a company which is into consumer electronics. It is a very young company. It started in 2016. It started with selling accessories, and they were actually into trading in a very big way, where they used to get their inventory from China, and they used to sell it in India. But what they did was they were focusing on building a brand, and they did build a brand, right? So they built a brand. They became acceptable in the market. They ramped up, and they got into wearables and lifestyle brands. Their turnover was 240 crores in FY19. Now they're focusing on building, further strengthening their brand, making their products much more affordable, aligning to a specific customer segment, which is millennials, Gen X. And the big focus has always been that they are an online channel company, online sales channel company. So in FY19, they were around 700 crores, and they aspire to be around 1,500 crores, in the next couple of years. How will they be 1,500 crores in the next couple of years? And that's the aspiration which they have. I will come to the challenges. as I said, the aspiration is to move, or I would say de-risk themselves from just being an online company to offline channel, diversify the products more, bring in more professionals, very standard thing in a lot of promoter companies where they're now investing in bringing in professionals and focus on growth. Now, the challenge is, I think the big challenge is, it is a big disconnect because there are only 150 employees in the company. There is no middle management. There are the promoters, no middle management, and they have the operational staff which is supporting them generate the 700 crore. But they also know that this is not going to take them to double the business in the next couple of years. They are also looking at how we can actually move from direct to customer online market into an offline channel. So that's another big area they want to focus on. They don't have very robust systems and processes. That's another thing which they're significantly investing in, and they're trying to ensure that they get the resources, the technology, the wherewithal to help them, double the business in coming times. So if you see the common factor between the two case studies, or in both the case studies, is they are bringing in professionals, they are defining roles and responsibilities more clearly, they are ensuring that the support in the back end is robust enough to provide the support for the front end to grow. So they are investing on the brand, they are reimagining their entire operating model, they are investing in talent, and also getting into offline channels, which is a new area for them, which they are not very well versed with. So professionals will come and help them invest and grow there. And so that's something which I think a new company really moving fast, making changes what they need to make, understanding the risks which they are exposed to if they really want to triple their organization. What is it that they need to do? And I think they're doing all the right things, on paper as of now. Hopefully they're able to implement it, and I'm sure they'll be able to deliver the numbers. So these are the two quick case studies I thought I'll share with you. I know I am significantly behind time, but I do give 30 minutes back or 27 minutes back to all of you to ask questions, please. So thank you very much. Over to.
That was excellent, Rohit. So, what you said at the beginning of the session, that it is important to manage risk to power business, and that the 5 strategies are avoid, transfer, mitigate, accept, and exploit. Wonderful. Okay, so we'll start taking questions now. We have 2 questions here already from the attendees. Mr. Vinayak is asking, will you please give a few more examples of self-inflicted risks?
So if you see self-inflicted risk, I did mention a couple of instances where, the day-to-day operational aspects of business decision-making, more often than not, because of lack of checks and balances, right? We tend to ignore the fact that there could be instances where it could be because of poor judgment, things could go wrong. There could be also instances where, because of our lack of understanding of some of the compliances, which we are supposed to comply with, especially on the regulatory side, there could be non-compliances, and we could run a risk of regulatory penalties and even, reputational impact, so to say, in a lot of instances. So these are some of the self-inflicted risks where we try to do things without knowing, what is it that we need to do to manage or comply with some of these. And I'll give you another example is, I know of organizations who are setting up plants in some tax-free zones. Now, it is very, very good that, they've identified an area where they can set up a manufacturing plant because they get tax benefits. But a lot of times they don't realize there is a lot of paperwork which needs to be maintained and reporting which needs to be done, right, to ensure that they are able to claim those credits. I've seen instances where that is not done. You've set up the manufacturing plant, right? But unfortunately, because you haven't, you haven't created the underlying documentation to claim the credit, you lose the benefit of the credit. And then you put the business to risk because your cost benefit goes for a 6, right? Your entire pricing model goes for a 6 because you've factored it into your pricing models, the benefit which you get. But when you don't get the benefit because the paperwork is not in place, you get challenged. So these are some of the instances where you call them as self-inflicted.
Sounds great. Okay, so we have one more question from Mr. Jayaraman. What are the key parameters to avoid in strategic planning and execution while transitioning from a SME to a ME?
What are the, sorry, could you just repeat?
What are the key parameters to avoid in strategic planning while transitioning from a small sector to a medium sector enterprise?
I think key parameters to avoid in strategic planning, first of all, I think we have to be very clear when you talk about uh, moving from SME to ME. I'm sure there is already a pretty well-defined game plan, and a reason why you are actually going to transition from one model to the other, right? Having said that, it is important to ensure that the reason why you are doing it, there is a very well defined strategy around it in terms of how you're going to do that transition. What is it, what benefit does it bring to the organization? The good part is that everyone gets full clarity of what is in it for the organization from a benefit standpoint, but people don't tend to give too much of credence to what are the risks which could get exposed to during the entire transition phase, right? So it's important that whenever you are taking a decision of a transition, at every step of the transition, there should be a question which should be asked: what can go wrong? And if we have an answer to what can go wrong, right, even if it's directional, it's easy to identify what is it that you need to do to mitigate the risk of what can go wrong. So I think it's an ongoing process. And if you see, and I'll relate it to what I said earlier in my presentation, is that it is very important to get risk sensing as part of your entire decision making process. So it should not be that you've taken a decision and then you're trying to figure out what is the risk. You have to decide the risk upfront before you take the decision. So risk sensing needs to be dovetailed into the entire decision making process.
Yes, sounds good. So Hardik is asking that how do we ensure that the calculated risk does not turn into a self-inflicted risk?
Great question. How does a calculated risk does not get into? Look, a calculated risk is something which I just referred to, wherein you are aware of the risk before you take a decision, right? A self-inflicted risk is basically poor management. Let me put it this way, wherein even when you know the risk, but you do not take any action to mitigate the risk. Right, that's self-inflicted. You are getting yourself into a risk mode. While calculated risk, you are aware of the risk, but you're doing whatever you need to do to mitigate the risk. And when I presented, I gave examples of getting into a new market. When you are getting into a new market, right, you've done your your assessment of the market, the potential, the competition. So you've done all that aspect, the regulatory environment or regulations which are required in the new market, etc. So you've done all those, and you've created a plan in terms of how you're going to respond to whatever exposure the organization could be in a new market, right? And when you get into the new market, then you're ready to respond to the risk which the organization gets exposed to. Unlike a self-inflicted risk, where you get into the market knowingly, but you do not act upon what you know. So, when you talk about poor judgment, that means someone is not investing time and effort to understand what is it that we need to address. A lot of times companies struggle to figure out what is the risk and how do I address it. When you don't even know the risk, right, there is no question of addressing it. So that's a significantly self-inflicted risk. You don't know the risk, but you still go ahead and take a decision to invest in an area, invest in a place, take certain operational decisions, etc.
Excellent. Okay, there are a lot of questions coming in, so I'll ask the more general ones.
Yeah.
Gaurav is asking, how does an SME go about identifying the technological risks that it faces? How do we identify the technological risks?
It's very interesting. Technology is a great enabler, but it also has its own challenges, right? And you need to use technology to address those challenges. That's the interesting part about technology. Now, today, if I just look at today's example, there is a lot of transformation happening. Everyone is working from home, right? The entire supply chain is getting disruptive, and there is a huge element of technology which is getting invested in across the board. People are moving from data centers to cloud. So everything which is happening, there is a significant use and leverage of technology. So the couple of things as an SME you need to know. I think you need to study which technology you're investing in. You need to make sure that whichever technology you're investing is, the company which you're investing with is fundamentally strong. Because it's very important that you invest in a technology, even if you need to pay a premium. And the reason you pay a premium is because the company which you're dealing with assures you that they are going to stand the test of time and be there when you need them. I think it is very, very important, right? So that is something you should consider before you invest in technology. Please do your homework before you invest in technology. There are so many aspects of technology today. There's so many service providers on technology today. You need to ensure that you enter into an arrangement with the right service provider who has the right solution for your business, right? And who will help you deliver on what your overall aspiration is. So it's very important that he or she, the service provider, is significantly connected and aligned to what your vision is and how that technology which you are leveraging can help you achieve that vision. Lastly, I think we should not also compromise with the fact that we buy the technology, but we don't secure ourselves. Cyber security has become a significant threat in today's environment. Don't forget to invest, build in whatever software you need to build in to ensure that you're protected from cyber attacks. And I will tell you, cyber attacks more often than happen because of employees. You exchange passwords, you share passwords, right? You do a lot of your personal work out of home. Since you're personal work from your office machine, since you're working out of home, you are on Wi-Fi networks which possibly are not as secure. The firewalls are not as strong. It just threatens or puts the entire organization to risk, where any hack could really put the business at risk. And that's what we're seeing and experiencing in today's environment. All these ransomwares, which are actually, encrypting servers of companies and, asking for ransomware to enable the servers again. If disable them, if you want to enable them, then you need to pay money, because if you don't pay money, then you've lost all your data, right? So you need to be intelligent in terms of, how to protect the technology which you invest in. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. There's another person who was asked, when planning strategy, how should we tackle current operational issues and risks, as they have a big effect on the current cash flows? And without solving the cash flow issues, how much time or budget should we cater towards the future?
Okay, very, very interesting question, but I'll have a couple of lines to it for sure. So if I just, in fact, I can see it on the screen, so I'll repeat it. It's a long question, so I'll read the question for myself. Okay, so I think when you plan a strategy, when you are building a strategic outlook for an organization, you build the outlook keeping in mind, all aspects of the ability of the organization to invest. So it is not that you create a strategy in the air and they say, look, I don't have money to, implement the strategy. So you should be cognizant of the fact that, what is your ability to invest in a specific game plan which you build for the organization. If funds is an issue as part of your overall strategy for the organization, it should be a very clear-cut definition of where the funds are going to come from to support that strategy. You can't create a strategy and then you say, look, I don't have money to implement the strategy. You wasted your time. So when you're building a strategy, and strategy is built by individuals, promoters or professional managers who understand the nuts and bolts of the organization, right? They understand what are the needs of the organization. They understand what are the limits of the organization. Keeping within that framework itself, or keeping that framework in mind, they will build a strategy in terms of, now, how do we move this organization to the next level? The other thing which I would like to highlight, I think it is also important to prioritize a lot of things. In business, there are a lot of things which are good to have, and there are things which are need to have. We need to make sure that we invest our time, money, and effort on need to have areas, not good to have. I have seen instances where a lot of organizations want to do more and want to invest in good to have areas. And when they do that, the need to have get ignored, and then they have a fundamental disconnect and a problem. So budget, the strategy needs to be built keeping in mind the budget you have, right? Which you will have the ability to invest to really deliver on the strategy.
Right. Okay. So Mr. Rafiq is asking that businesses go bust due to external factors like regulatory and competition. Example, the Vodafone idea, like the disruption risk, as you were saying. So how to survive in such cases? Rohit, you're on mute.
Sorry, I will not like to comment on any clients, so to say, but to your question that businesses go bust due to external factors, I think if I just take that and respond to it, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And in today's environment itself, there are a lot of businesses which have struggled, are struggling. When you look at some of the industries, the entire hospitality industry is struggling, especially on the SME side. The restaurant businesses are struggling. A lot of restaurants are shut down. Right. The offline shopping is struggling, right? Because shops are not open till now. I think now this was a black swan event for sure. The entire pandemic was a black swan event. Sure. Now, regulatory changes can also be defined as a black swan event in a lot of instances. Right. So it is very important. I think it is very important that, when you are running a business which is highly regulated, right, we need to be, on top of what is the government thinking with respect to our industry. It is very, very, very important. I have seen a lot of times, there is a complacency which comes into companies, and this is more in the large companies, where they believe that they're too big to fail. But we are in a world today where there is nothing as too big to fail. Regulations change because regulations are made for a specific purpose. When the environment changes, right, regulations are bound to change. So if you look at the example which you gave and turn back the clock and look at the chronology of events, organizations which have transformed over the years within that sector have survived and invested in areas which are emerging areas, which have a future, have survived. But organizations which have carried on running the business in a very traditional fashion, not investing in areas, right, which are emerging and which are the future of business, are struggling. You can say it's regulation. I don't think so. It's regulation. I think it's more being agile, more being reactive, and more forward-looking in today's environment to really survive and grow. So it's very important that you are in sync and in pace with what's happening in the environment. What are the customer preferences? What technological changes are happening? Where is the world moving? Where is the market moving? Right? What kind of market segment are we servicing? Their tastes and preferences, and respond to that rather than saying, look, this is my product, take it or leave it. I mean, when you get into that mindset, right, then you are definitely putting your entire existence to risk.
Right. So it's about looking at the emerging trends and trying to connect the dots every day.
I will just repeat my statement again. I know I've repeated it 5 times, but I'll repeat it once more. Sure. It is very important to build in risk sensing in your decision-making process. Again, I come back to the same point. You can't say, let me take decisions, we'll figure out the risk. Those times have gone.
Are gone.
Because right. The impact is much bigger now. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So Mr. Stephen is asking, where will you fit pivoting as a risk? Maybe it might be changing the business strategy or changing the business as a whole.
Where do I fit pivoting as a risk? Look, if you're asking me in terms of calculated, imposed, and self-inflicted, I would actually put it as a calculated risk. When you are pivoting your business, I'm sure you're not doing it because one fine day in the morning you think about, let me change my business model. It doesn't work like that, right? Or it should not work like that. I think it's a known decision. When I say known, it's a much informed decision. You are pivoting your business model or your business focus to a newer area, newer market, newer technology, etc., because you believe that's the right thing to do for the business. And my presumption is that you've done whatever it takes to do that transition. Will the transition lead to risk? Absolutely, a transition will lead to risk. And that's where, the entire concept which I talked about is, do you want to avoid the risk? Do you want to mitigate the risk? Or you want to accept the risk? In some instances, even you want to exploit the risk. Right. So when you're saying you're pivoting, that means you have understood the transition could lead to risks. You're aware of it. The risks are known and you've accepted those risks. When I say accepted those risks, either you have mitigated them and then you've accepted them. You've accepted them because you believe there is more benefit in making the pivot than not making the pivot. Yes. And you have mitigated whatever can go wrong through your processes, controls, whatever it might be. You've done that.
Yeah. Right. So the cost benefit sometimes says that, taking the risk is worth the reward. So
yeah,
go for it.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Risk and reward. I know that people say that if you want to get rewarded, you need to take risks, but you need to take you need to prepare for them. It is just not take a risk and you'll get rewarded. It doesn't work like that.
Yes, doesn't work like that. Doesn't work like that now at all. I don't know if ever it worked like that. So Himanshu is asking, now this is a pain point with all of us, and maybe we are at 5:54. We have maybe one or two questions that we can take. We are a 100 crore company, first generation business in FMCG. How do we make an advisory board from graduates from IIT and IIM, as generally they don't want to come in a small company, which is a pain point for all of us. Big institution graduates don't really want to come and work in a SME sector. So how do we do that?
It's very interesting. You say that the graduates don't want to work in small, because I don't think so. There's any definition of small company anymore. There is no definition of small company. If you look at the unicorns, those companies, most of them did not even exist 5 years back or 7 years back. So there is nothing as small or big. I think talent will get pulled or attracted to those companies where they believe that they will have the flexibility, they will have the empowerment, and they will have the accountability. It's very, very important. Look, everyone wants to contribute, right? So what happens more often than not, if they see that in an organization, right, which is not aspirational, right, the strings are being pulled by a limited few, right, resources are limited, right, there is no empowerment, right, so people will not come in. But organizations where there is a vision, right, which is supported by the fact that, look, ideas will be invested in, there will be full support provided, you will get the empowerment, you will be made accountable, right, there will be enough support for you. I think today there are enough of these smart students who would like to give away the plum jobs which a lot of large MNCs offer, right, from campus, and join these startups or smaller organizations because they believe that they will be able to do much more in a smaller organization than they will be in a bigger organization. The exposure which they get in smaller organization will be much more because there are a lot of things which they'll have to do it themselves, as compared to a larger organization where things, systems, and processes are already in place. You just need to go and fit yourself somewhere and perform as part of their evaluation of performance metrics. Yes. Unlike a smaller organization where there are no performance metrics, you create a business from scratch, right? Work with the promoters or startups, new entrepreneurs, and grow the business. So that's a different high altogether. So that's my response to this question. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just take a moment to take the feedback poll. Ruchika, it'll just take 30 seconds. On your screen, you will see a feedback poll. Please answer those questions. Meanwhile, I'll read out the next question, Rohit. I think this will be the last question for the day because we are at 5:57. So Siddiq is asking that we are a 50 crore company, but planning for expansion with 50 franchisee in glass and mirror industry with a target of 500 crore. As our business is a family business, we are working traditionally with some systems and processes set in some parts. We need help or consultation with proper system and processes. Who can guide us to make and plan and guide and handhold? Maybe your future customer.
Yeah, so I think I'll raise my hand. I can guide you. No, I think there are a lot of these advisory organizations today, and there are also sector focused advisory organizations. You should definitely look at some of these advisory organizations who are good in the sector in which you are, right, and who can help you build your processes, which will align to where you want to take your business.
Right. Okay. So there was one more question. What are the risks of converting a proprietary business into a private limited?
Oh, okay. So you're testing my regulatory and legal skills. What is the risk of moving a proprietary business to a private limited company, right? That's what the question is. So I think I am not best suited to answer that question, I must say. But having said that, in a proprietary business, it's a small group of people running it. Information is restricted to a few. It is not publicly available. In a private company, there is reporting which happens to the MCA. Your financials are available online with the MCA, so they will have access to those financials, and then obviously you need to have directors in your organization. You need to create a board. You need to make sure that you're filing your returns at an organization level. So there are multiple things which you need to do. So I don't think so there is any risk, so to say, to move to a private company, and down the line, depending upon how large you become, move to a public limited company where you would take money from the public. I think that's a natural progression of every organization. You start as a sole proprietorship, you move to a private limited, and then when you become large and you have a business plan, then you go to the market, pick up funds, and become a public limited company, right? And that's how you naturally grow.
Right. Excellent. So
Yeah.
That was very good, Rohit. Thank you very much for such an insightful session. One of the key things I think all of us have to take back is that risk needs to be an element while strategic planning. And as you said, not just take the decision and then hope for the best, but we have to ensure that it gets into the strategic planning every day.
Right. So, absolutely.
Yes. That's excellent. Thank you very much, Rohit. And thank you all the attendees for this session. Archana, do you want to add anything?
No, I think it was very nice of you, Rohit, to agree to be part of our ASCENT knowledge sessions. We do this as much as possible now to help the ecosystem of 700 entrepreneurs that we have across Pan India to get equipped with more knowledge. And thank you so much for being part of it. Deloitte has been a great partner in the past, also with a lot of speakers coming, and we are so happy that you have agreed to be one of us. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is all mine. Wish you all the very best. You take care.
Thanks. And thank you, Rutvika, for
thanks, Rutvika. Great. Thanks. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.